At 3:47 p.m., high above enemy territory, a single needle on a cockpit gauge fell to zero. Oil pressure gone. In less than 90 seconds, a fighter aircraft traveling at hundreds of miles per hour would become a falling mass of metal. Lieutenant Bruce Carr understood exactly what that meant. He was not going to make it home. What happened next would defy probability, doctrine, and every survival statistic of the Second World War, and would turn one American pilot into a legend that still challenges how we understand risk, choice, and human limits. By late 1944, the air war over Europe had become a relentless industrial contest. The Allies controlled much of the sky, but German air defenses remained deadly. Flak batteries guarded airfields, factories, rail hubs, and supply lines with ruthless efficiency. Even experienced pilots were being lost daily. The United States Army Air Forces relied heavily on fighter bombers flying low-altitude missions, strafe runs designed to destroy aircraft, fuel depots, and infrastructure before German forces could react. These missions were effective, but extremely dangerous. On November 2, 1944, Lieutenant Bruce Carr was leading one of those attacks over occupied Czechoslovakia. His aircraft, a P-51 Mustang, had already made several passes against a German airfield. Smoke rose from damaged hangars. Enemy aircraft burned on the ground. Then, flak found him. An 88mm shell burst close enough for fragments to rip into his engine compartment. One piece severed the oil line feeding the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the heart of the Mustang. Carr watched the gauge drop. Black smoke streamed across his canopy. He knew the mechanics as well as any engineer. Without oil, the engine's internal components would grind themselves into seizure. Once that happened, the propeller would lock, transforming the aircraft into an uncontrollable glider. He had seconds to decide. Carr rolled the aircraft inverted, released the canopy, and fell into the freezing air. When his parachute opened, the reality below him became clear. Forests stretched in every direction. No friendly territory, no landmarks, just occupied land under German control. He landed more than 200 miles behind enemy lines. Statistically, American pilots shot down over occupied Europe faced grim odds. Fewer than 1 in 4 would evade capture and return to Allied lines. Most were taken prisoner. Some disappeared entirely. Carr had no food, no water, no radio. His only weapon was a pistol with 7 rounds. Winter was approaching. And yet within 4 days, Bruce Carr would do something no Allied pilot in the European theater had ever done before or would ever do again. Bruce Ward Carr was born on January 28, 1924, in Union Springs, New York. His upbringing was unremarkable by historical standards, rural, modest, and far removed from the centers of power that shaped global events. What distinguished him was exposure to flight at an unusually early age. In 1939, at just 15 years old, Carr learned to fly not through any military program, but informally. A local crop duster allowed him to take the controls of a biplane. There were no structured lessons, no manuals, just hands on the stick and instinct. That year mattered. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, igniting World War II. Aviation would soon dominate modern warfare, and Carr, though he could not yet know it, was learning the most valuable skill of his generation. By 16, he had accumulated more flight time than many formal aviation cadets. When the United States entered the war, Carr enlisted in the Army Air Forces in September 1942. During training, fate intervened again. His flight instructor was the same man who had taught him years earlier. Recognizing Carr's experience, he recommended him for accelerated advancement. Carr progressed rapidly. By early 1944, he was deployed to England, assigned to a fighter group flying the P-51 Mustang, the aircraft that would reshape the European air war. The P-51 was not simply another fighter. It was a solution to a strategic crisis. Before its widespread deployment, heavy bombers like the B-17 and B-24 suffered catastrophic losses. Heavy bombers were vulnerable without escort fighters capable of flying the full distance to targets deep inside Germany. The Mustang changed that. With long range, high speed, and devastating firepower, it could escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. German pilots gave it a nickname that reflected both respect and fear. Carr fell in love with the aircraft immediately. It was responsive, powerful, and precise. He named his plane Angel's Playmate. Combat came quickly. Carr's flying style was aggressive, even reckless by some standards. In early engagements, he chased enemy aircraft at treetop height, ignoring risk in favor of pursuit. Superiors sometimes reprimanded him, but they also relied on his results. By mid-1944, Carr was flying with elite Mustang units. He scored confirmed kills over Normandy, destroyed enemy aircraft on the ground, and repeatedly placed himself in danger to protect wingmen. In September 1944, during a strafing mission, Carr attacked a formation of German fighters far below him. In minutes, he destroyed 3 enemy aircraft and escorted a damaged American pilot safely home. For this, he was awarded the Silver Star. By October, Carr had become an ace. Then, 4 days later, he was falling into enemy territory. Carr hit the frozen ground hard. His ankle twisted badly on landing, making movement painful and slow. He buried his parachute immediately, standard procedure to avoid detection. He knew German patrols would search the area. He had minutes, not hours. Most downed pilots tried to flee toward Allied lines. Carr did the opposite. He moved north towards the German airfield he had just attacked. The logic was simple and dangerous. German forces would expect him to run. They would search outward. They would not expect him to approach their own base. For 3 days, Carr survived in forests and ditches. He drank from streams. He avoided roads. He lay motionless while patrols passed within hundreds of yards. Hunger became overwhelming. His body burned thousands of calories a day simply staying warm. By the 3rd day, he had eaten nothing. Carr considered surrender. Captured airmen were often treated according to a professional code. Prisoner of war camps were harsh but survivable. Compared to starvation in the forest, surrender was rational. Then, on the 4th afternoon, he reached the edge of the airfield. From concealment, Carr observed hangars, fuel trucks, and aircraft. As dark fell, something caught his attention. A single Focke-Wulf FW-190 parked in a revetment. 2 German mechanics worked methodically. They fueled the aircraft, ran the engine, checked systems. Then they shut it down, secured it, and left. The aircraft was ready to fly. At that moment, Carr's situation changed completely. Carr had never flown a German aircraft. He could not read German. He did not know the FW-190's systems. But he understood flight. He had logged more than 500 combat hours. He knew that physics did not change with language. Every aircraft had the same essentials: throttle, stick, and rudder. The plan to surrender disappeared. At 3 a.m, Carr crossed open ground towards the aircraft. 80 yards, no cover. One spotlight sweep or patrol glance would end everything. Carr reached the FW-190 and climbed into the cockpit. The interior was completely foreign. Labels in Gothic script, gauges arranged differently from American aircraft. The cockpit was tighter, more armored. Carr had 4 hours until sunrise. He studied everything. He identified instruments by position and function. He tested controls gently. He searched for the starter. Finally, he found an inertia starter, a mechanical system unlike anything in the P-51. He engaged it. The engine roared to life with a sound Carr later described as thunder. German personnel would hear it. Time was gone. Carr pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft surged ahead.
He aimed between hangars, accelerating through darkness. At barely 90 miles per hour, he pulled back. The FW-190 lifted off. Bruce Carr was airborne in a stolen German fighter. Escape was the first challenge. Carr flew at treetop level, hugging terrain to avoid radar. The German fighter was fast, powerful, and unfamiliar, but it held together. When he crossed into Allied territory, American anti-aircraft units opened fire immediately. To them, he was the enemy. Carr flew lower, faster, barely above roads and fields. Civilians dove for cover as he passed. When he reached his home airfield in France, a final problem appeared. The gear would not deploy. Under fire from his own side, Carr chose a belly landing. The aircraft skidded across the grass
and came to a stop. Moments later, military police surrounded it with rifles raised. Then, an American pilot climbed out. The story spread rapidly, but Carr's defining moment was still ahead. In April 1945, near the end of the war, Carr led 4 Mustangs into a formation of more than 60 German fighters. Against all doctrine, he attacked. In 15 minutes, 15 enemy aircraft were destroyed. Bruce Carr personally shot down 5. Bruce Carr survived 3 wars: World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. He flew more than 500 combat missions across the propeller and jet eras. He retired as a colonel and was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His headstone lists rank, decorations, and wars. It does not list the stolen aircraft. It does not list the 4 days behind enemy lines. Those moments exist outside stone and inscription. Carr's story is not about recklessness. It is about choice, about refusing to accept that survival has only one correct path. When faced with impossible odds, Bruce Carr did not ask what was allowed. He asked what was possible. And in doing so, he changed the outcome twice.